I never imagined I'd find myself standing in a courtroom, bewildered and angry, handcuffed to a metal chair as a judge slammed down his gavel. But there I was, feeling as if the world had suddenly been flipped upside down, the air thick with confusion, tension, and disbelief. It all started with a phone call. An ordinary call, really, from Sarah, my ex-wife, who had a habit of making every conversation feel like an emergency. I had been divorced from her for nearly 3 years at that point. And the last thing I expected was for her to disrupt my life again. "We need to talk about Mason," she said, her voice calm but with a sharp edge that I hadn't heard in a while. "Meet me at the court tomorrow." I tried to stay neutral, knowing she'd been putting pressure on me to keep up with child support. Sure, I had been behind a month or two, but nothing that was worth a legal battle. Surely, still, Sarah had always been stubborn, and our conversations about money were never simple. At the time, I didn't know that meeting would change the entire course of my life. The next day, I arrived at the courthouse, feeling a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. Sarah was already there, sitting with her lawyer, the moment I stepped into the room. I felt a tension in the air, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The judge, an older man with a stern look, glanced at me like I was already guilty of something. "Mr. Miller," he said, motioning for me to sit. I did, but I had a feeling something wasn't right. "Your Honor," Sarah's lawyer began, standing up, "we are here because Mr. Miller has failed to meet his financial obligations for his son, Mason." I was stunned. I had been paying every month, sometimes more, when I could afford it. Sure, I had missed a payment or two, but who doesn't get behind sometimes? I wasn't trying to avoid responsibility. But that wasn't what the court heard. The lawyer laid out a series of accusations, each more damning than the last, that I had been hiding income, that I had failed to pay for months, and that I had been deliberately avoiding my financial obligations. I tried to speak, to explain that I wasn't hiding anything, that I had been struggling, but the words never seemed to reach anyone. And then the judge spoke. "You are in contempt of court," he declared, his voice flat. "Mr. Miller, I hereby issue a bench warrant for your arrest. You will be detained until this matter is resolved." The words hit me like a physical blow. Arrested, for child support? It didn't make sense. How could this be happening? I had always done my best, tried to keep up with the payments, always worried about Mason, always trying to do right by him. But none of that mattered now. The next few moments were a blur. I was escorted out of the courtroom by a sheriff, my mind reeling. I couldn't understand how I had gotten here. The last time I had seen Sarah, we had exchanged some cold pleasantries. Nothing more. There was no reason for her to do this. But now, I was being dragged away from the one thing that mattered to me most, my son. I couldn't believe it. The holding cell was cold and sterile, a place designed to break you down, to make you realize just how far gone your situation is. As the hours passed, I couldn't help but think about Mason. How would he feel when he found out that his dad was locked up? Would he think I abandoned him? Would he understand that this wasn't my fault? The reality of the situation hit me hard. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about losing everything I had worked so hard to protect. I wasn't just a man in jail, I was a father who had been taken away from his child for something that seemed so wrong, so unjust. Days passed, then weeks. The days blended together in the silence of the cell. I tried to make calls, to reach out to anyone who could help me, but everything felt like it was slipping through my fingers. My lawyer, who was doing his best, couldn't make any headway. The legal system seemed so slow, so unwilling to budge. No one seemed to care that I was innocent of the charges against me. It was a living nightmare. But then, in the middle of my despair, my lawyer came to visit. He looked more tired than usual, but there was a light in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before. "We've got something," he said, sitting down across from me. I sat up straighter, heart pounding. "What do you mean?" Sarah agreed to a paternity test. He said, "We're going to get a DNA test, and it will clear your name." For the first time in weeks, a sliver of hope pierced through the fog of my despair. A DNA test? Was it possible that I wasn't even Mason's father? The thought was almost too much to handle. But I didn't care. If there was even the slightest chance of proving my innocence, I would cling to it. As I waited for the test results, I tried to hold on to that hope. But the truth was that my life was crumbling around me. I had been thrown into a situation I didn't deserve. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how completely powerless I had been in Sarah's game. I had always thought I was doing the right thing. But now, I was questioning everything. The life I had built, the father I had tried to be for Mason, was all being called into question. Would the test really clear my name? Or would it destroy everything I had worked for? I spent the next few days in a haze, each one blending into the next as I anxiously awaited the results of the paternity test. The worst part was the uncertainty, the not knowing. In some ways, I longed for the moment when everything would be confirmed, one way or the other. I told myself that if the test proved I wasn't Mason's father, it would all be over. I'd be free. But the more I thought about it, the more conflicted I became. If I wasn't his father, what would that mean for everything I had done for him? All those years I had spent raising him, loving him, protecting him, none of it would count. I would have been nothing more than a stranger in his life. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been lied to all along. That Sarah had kept something from me for all these years. But how could she have done it? How could she have let me believe that Mason was my son when he wasn't? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mason's face. He was so much like me. In so many ways, his laugh, the way he scrunched his nose when he was annoyed, the way his hair curled at the ends. I had spent so much time looking after him, teaching him, worrying about him. Could it all have been a lie? It wasn't long before my lawyer returned with the results. I was sitting in my cell, staring at the concrete walls, when I heard the unmistakable sound of keys rattling outside my door. My heart skipped a beat as the door swung open. "Mr. Miller," the guard said, "your lawyer's here to see you." I stood up, suddenly feeling dizzy. I had been counting the days since we'd sent in the test. The wait had felt endless. But now, the moment was finally here. I had no idea what to expect. I walked with the guard to the small, sterile room where my lawyer was waiting. He stood as I entered, a manila folder in his hands. His face was unreadable, but the glimmer in his eyes gave me some hope. "Sit down, Mr. Miller," he said gently, as though sensing how on edge I was. I sat, my palms sweating, my heart racing. I couldn't focus on anything but the folder. It held the key to everything I had been fighting for, everything that had been taken from me. "Well," he began, breaking the silence, "the results are in, and the news is, it's not what you expected." I swallowed hard, leaning forward, bracing myself for whatever was about to come. "You are not Mason's biological father." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My brain couldn't process them at first. It was like the room was spinning, and I was hearing the words, but they didn't make sense. I was no longer his father. For a moment, I was paralyzed. Everything, my entire life, my relationship with Mason, my sense of identity felt like it was crashing down on me. I had been living a lie. My mind was a blur of disbelief. But in the back of my head, something whispered that I had known all along. I had suspected for a while now that something was off, but I hadn't dared to believe it. It was easier to ignore the nagging feeling, to cling to the idea that I was a good father to Mason. I had loved him, I had raised him, I had taught him how to ride a bike and how to handle the bullies at school. I had been there for every scraped knee, every broken heart. I had been there for every moment that mattered. But now, none of it mattered. "You don't look surprised," my lawyer said, his voice cautious. I don't know what to feel," I said quietly, my voice shaking. "I've been his father in every way that matters. But now I'm just nothing." "That's not true," he said quickly. "You've still been his father. In every way but biology. That won't change just because of this test. But legally," he trailed off, sensing my confusion. "Legally, this changes everything. It means Sarah's claims about child support were based on a lie." The full weight of his words didn't hit me until later. Sarah had known all along. She had known that I wasn't Mason's father, and yet she had manipulated me, used me. She had demanded money, had forced me into a battle I couldn't win. She had locked me in a jail cell, all for something that wasn't even my responsibility. How could she do this? I asked, my voice cracking. How could she make me pay for something that wasn't my fault? My lawyer hesitated before answering. "That's something you'll have to take up with her. But for now, we have grounds to challenge the child support order. To clear your name." The days that followed felt like a blur. I had been in jail for 8 months, and now I was finally going to be free. But the freedom I had fought for felt hollow. I had been waiting for this moment. But now that it was here, I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't Mason's father. I was a stranger who had been caught in the web of someone else's lies. It took a while for the full scope of it all to sink in. I had been humiliated, locked away like a criminal, and all for something that was beyond my control. But I had my lawyer's assurance that I would be free. The paternity test had confirmed everything, and Sarah's lies would no longer have any hold over me. When I was finally released, it wasn't like I had imagined. I had hoped that somehow, things would go back to normal, that I would walk out of that jail cell and be able to go home, to hold Mason in my arms and tell him everything would be okay. But I couldn't do that. Because Mason wasn't my son. Life after my release wasn't as simple as just walking away from everything that had happened. It wasn't a neat, clean break. The past 8 months had changed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I felt like I had lost a part of myself during that time. I wasn't just locked away in a cell, I was locked away from my son. From my sense of identity. from everything that had once mattered to me. Mason's face haunted me. Every night, I lay awake thinking about him, what he was doing, how he was feeling. I hadn't been there for him, and that was something I couldn't undo. I had missed so much of his life, and even now, I wasn't sure how to fix it. I was no longer his father in the legal sense, but I couldn't just walk away from the years we'd spent together. I loved him. I still loved him. When I finally contacted him, the conversation wasn't what I expected. Mason was older now, a teenager, and he had heard the rumors. He had heard that I wasn't his biological father, and the news had hit him hard. He didn't know what to believe. How could he? His whole life had been turned upside down, just like mine. The journey to rebuild my relationship with Mason was slow, painstaking. I didn't expect it to be easy. How could it be? I wasn't just fighting for my freedom anymore, I was fighting for a chance to be a father again. Not a biological one, but a real one. A father who had made mistakes, who had been betrayed, but who was still here, still willing to fight for his son. It wasn't easy, but over time, we began to reconnect. We spent weekends together, talking, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with ease. I took him to his favorite places, tried to remind him of the bond we once shared. Slowly, he began to trust me again, and in his eyes, I saw that he still needed me, despite everything. And then one day, he called me, Dad, again. It was the most beautiful word I had ever heard. Years passed, and things gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy. Mason was no longer the young child I had known. He had grown into a strong young man. A teenager with his own dreams, his own goals, his own life. But through it all, he never stopped being my son. The title had been stripped away from me legally, but the bond we shared was undeniable. We never spoke of the past much. The lies, the betrayal, the legal battles, they were behind us. What mattered now was that we had rebuilt our relationship, one piece at a time. And for the first time in a long time, I was at peace.